By the final week of April, Axis armies in Italy had collapsed under an overwhelming Allied assault. To the west, French forces in the 6th Army, commanded by Jacob Devers, was over the Italian border. In Germany, the US 7th Army in the last week of April was close to Munich, while American forces were advancing east along the Danube Valley. The British Army started to assault Hamburg on the 28th of April. The Red Army had launched the battle for Berlin, and with the Bulgarian army under its command had captured Vienna, it was pushing towards what is now southern Austria. The Yugoslav army under Josef Broz Tito, who had been named Prime Minister of an anti-Axis government in March, was advancing through Croatia. In northern Italy, the Allies were advancing rapidly. A general insurrection against Nazi occupation and fascist rule had been declared by the National Liberation Committee of Northern Italy on the 25th of April. That day, Benito Mussolini fled Milan with his closest supporters and his mistress Claretta Petacci, and they headed north. Many cities quickly fell under partisan control. Axis forces retreated towards the northeast, where the route to the Third Reich remained open. Growing numbers found themselves isolated and surrounded. On the 27th of April, Combat Command A in the 1st Armoured Division entered Milan, Italy's largest city, which was already under partisan control. On the Ligurian coast, the 92nd Division reached Genoa, where its garrison of 4,000 troops had surrendered to the partisans the day before, though the port garrison on a hill overlooking the harbour held out for a further 24 hours. 442 Infantry Regiment, attached to the 92nd Division, captured Alessandria and its garrison of 3,000 men and made contact with the Brazilian Expeditionary Force. Contact between the 92nd Division and 4 Corps had already been established at Pavia. On the 28th of April, Brazil's 6th Regimental Combat Team attacked 148 Infantry Division in Fornovo. Its commander, Otto Fretta Pico, surrendered with almost 15,000 German and Italian troops the next evening. Piacenza was captured by the 34th Division, and Combat Command A in the 1st Armoured Division reached Como. The 2nd New Zealand Division in the 8th Army entered Padua. That day, Commander-in-Chief of Army Group C, Heinrich von Wittgenhoff, reported that fighting would cease within 1 or 2 days because German troops had neither arms nor ammunition left. He had already decided against carrying out Hitler's order that maximum destruction should be done before German forces withdrew. Talks had started in February about a possible surrender of Axis forces in Italy, involving Office of Strategic Services Station Chief in Switzerland Alan Dulles and Karl Wolff, Supreme SS and Police Commander in Italy. They had been shut down on the 14th of April following the death of President Roosevelt. But the idea was reactivated with the collapse of resistance in Italy in the final week of April. Wolff had by then convinced Minister of Defense of the Italian Social Republic and Commander-in-Chief of Army Group Liguria, Marshal Rodolfo Graziani, to sign a document offering the surrender of German and Italian forces under his command. On the 26th of April, orders were given to Victor von Schweinitz, Chief of Staff for Wittgenhoff, and Eugen Wehner to take the document to the Allies. They travelled through Switzerland to Annecy, south of Geneva, where they were flown to Allied headquarters in Caserta, arriving on the 28th of April. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the 29th of April, a surrender document was signed by von Schweinitz on behalf of von Wichtenhof and by Vienna on behalf of Wolf and Marshal Graziani. Lieutenant General William Duffy Morgan signed on behalf of Field Marshal Harold Alexander. The ceremony was witnessed by Soviet General Alexei Kislenko and a Polish officer named Wralewski. The key passage of the document said, "All armed forces under the command or control of the German Commander-in-Chief Southwest will cease all hostilities on land, at sea and in the air at 1200 hours Greenwich Mean Time on the 2nd of May 1945. Von Schweinitz and Wehner returned to Wolf's head office in Bolzano with the signed surrender document on the 30th of April 1945. The Allies, meanwhile, had made substantial progress on the ground. At 6 o'clock in the evening of the 29th of April, the 2nd 5th Battalion of the Queen's Royal Regiment in 169 Brigade of the 56th Division entered Venice. Its unconditional surrender was accepted. Chief of Staff of the Italian-German Ligurian Army of Northwest Italy, Max Pemzel, signed surrender terms in the absence of its commander, General Graziani, who had been captured by partisans. On the 30th of April, Turin was reported clear of Axis forces. Kurt Jahn of the Lombardy Corps surrendered west of Milan. 473 Infantry Regiment in the 92nd Division met French troops near Savona, 30 miles to the west of Genoa. The 10th Mountain Division cleared towns at the head of Lake Garda. Meanwhile, the 85th Mountain Infantry made an amphibious operation across the lake to Gargnano in a vain attempt to capture high fascist officials, including Mussolini. On the Adriatic coast, Chioggia fell to the Italian Cremona Group. 8th Army had now virtually destroyed the German 10th Army and was driving rapidly towards Austria and Yugoslavia, where its objective was to secure Trieste, which the Yugoslav army had surrounded. The British 6th Armoured Division seized a bridge over the Piave River southwest of Conegliano, and the New Zealanders established a bridgehead further south on the 30th of April. That afternoon, in a bunker under the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, Adolf Hitler and his partner Eva Braun killed themselves. Joseph Goebbels succeeded as Chancellor, but he and his wife killed themselves and their children the next day. Admiral Karl Dönitz was named head of state, a position he held until his government was dissolved and Dönitz was arrested by the British at the end of May. On the 1st of May, the 2nd New Zealand Division made contact with the Yugoslavs at Monfalcone, 20 miles northwest of Trieste. In an agreement with Yugoslav leader Marshal Tito, Trieste and its hinterland was jointly occupied by the New Zealanders and the Yugoslavs until June, when it became a de facto free state. It was partitioned between Italy and Yugoslavia in 1954, with the city itself remaining in Italy. At 4 o'clock in the morning of the 2nd of May, Albert Kesselring, who had been appointed Commander-in-Chief for southern Germany, approved the surrender in Italy. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon local time, Axis troops in Italy and western Austria began to lay down their arms. Allied Mediterranean Commander Field Marshal Harold Alexander said that the surrender of Caserta shortened the war in Europe by 6 to 8 weeks and saved northern Italy from more destruction and tens of thousands of lives. The hopes of hardline Nazis that a last-ditch redoubt could be established in the mountains of southern Germany and Austria, involving forces transferred from Italy, were dashed. There were pockets of resistance, but the fighting in Italy was now largely over, though still not in the Third Reich, despite Berlin's surrender on the 2nd of May. On the 3rd of May, the 85th and the 88th Divisions in two corps sent task forces north to seal Italy's northern border. Around 11 o'clock the next morning, 349 Infantry met the 7th Army's 6th Corps at Vipiteno, south of Brenna. That morning at 10:30, General Friedlin von Zenger und Ettlin was received at his headquarters in Florence by 15th Army Group Commander Mark Clark to receive instructions about the implementation of the surrender. Clark was accompanied by 5th Army Commander Lucien Truscott, 8th Army Commander Richard McCreary, and 12th Air Force Commander Benjamin Chidlaw. On the 5th of May, the 10th Mounted Division reached Nauders and made contact with German forces which were being pushed south by the Americans. They subsequently surrendered to the 7th Army. The following day, the division met the 7th Army's 44th Infantry Division. There were now friendly forces on Italy's west, north, and eastern frontiers, and all major exit routes had been sealed. At 41 minutes past 2 local time on Monday, the 7th of May 1945, in General Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims in northeast France, German Army Chief of Staff Alfred Jodl signed the document for the unconditional surrender of German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Force and, simultaneously, to the Soviet High Command. All forces under German control were to cease active operations at 1 minute after midnight on the morning of the 9th of May, 1945. The war in Europe was over. In Italy, the accounting for its horrors had already begun. Benito Mussolini had spent 2 days after fleeing Milan on the 25th of April fruitlessly trying to escape from Italy. On the 27th of April, he joined a Luftwaffe column travelling in convoy northwards to Germany. Communist partisans halted the convoy near the village of Dongo on the northwestern shore of Lake Como. Mussolini was discovered in one of its vehicles. The following day, Mussolini and Petacci were driven to the village of Gilino di Mezzegra on the west bank of Como, 10 miles south of Dongo. There they were shot by machine gun by a wall of the Villa Belmonte. The bodies of Mussolini, Petacci, and the other executed fascists were dumped in the Piazzale Loreto near Milan's main railway station in the early hours of the 29th of April. The bodies were later hung by their feet from the metal girder framework of a half-built service station. Mussolini was hurriedly buried. He was finally reinterred in his family crypt in Predapio on the 1st of September 1957.